What do you get when America's most beloved icon walks into a studio expecting a warm welcome and is met with polite condescension, a steady stream of veiled insults, and a host who mistake jabs for brilliance? This is not the story of raised voices or dramatic confrontations. This is the story of composure, of quiet strength. This is the story of the moment that the sweetest soul draws a line in the sand. What happened that morning in The View would shock the room into a deafening silence, disrupt the normal ebb and flow of the show, and culminate in a walk-off no one saw coming. But how did a moment like that even come to be? The studio was just as I imagined for the holidays, a warm, inviting globe emanating from soft lighting. A flicker from the candles strategically placed behind the glass table, and wreaths artfully adorning the windows was carefully constructed to look welcoming, comfortable, safe. And Dolly Parton noticed it the second she stepped onto the set. Dressed in a black sequins that sparkled and gleamed without overwhelming, her hair sculpted in that undeniable Dolly style, but softer, less stage. Her wave to the crowd with that ubiquitous smile that immediately warmed the entire space and earned her a deafening roar of applause. But not everyone shared her sentiment. Joy Behar studied Dolly, her expression neutral, neither smiling nor frowning, simply observing. Whoopi Goldberg was the first to extend her greetings, as she always does. "Please welcome the one and only Dolly Parton." The applause erupted again. Dolly clasped a hand over her heart in thanks, and proceeded to take her seat, her hands folded neatly in front of her on the table. A mug of tea sat between Dolly and Joy, small ceramic place markers for the conversation to come that already hinted at being rather sharp. "Thank you for having me," Dolly offered warmly. "It's so nice to be here." Her voice was exactly as everyone expected, sweet, familiar, utterly disarming. For the next few minutes, the conversation flowed along the standard channels. Whoopi asked her about new music. Another co-host prompted a discussion of her literacy foundation. Laughter rippled. Admiration bloomed easily through it all. Dolly responded with grace, succinct but thoughtful, never promoting herself, discussing her creativity, giving back, and her journey from the mountains of Tennessee to this moment, all the while maintaining that genuine humbleness. It was seamless. Then, almost imperceptibly, something changed. You know that moment where a conversation shifts before the first word has even revealed its intent? Joy leaned in, not with a quick, aggressive motion, but almost fluidly. A slight tilting of her head, a stiffening in her stance. It was the kind of shift that screamed to me that Joy was no longer truly listening. She was preparing. "So, Dolly," Joy began casually, but with a hint of an edge in her voice, "you've been in the industry for quite a while now." Dolly smiled. "I have." "For decades, actually," Joy continued with drawn-out syllables. "Different eras, different kinds of audiences, and you've never really wavered from your image?" There was a beat of silence. Not very long, but deliberate. Dolly blinked. Her smile remained in place. "Well," she said sweetly, "I've always believed that if you know who you are, you don't need to chase after fads." A soft murmur of agreement spread through the crowd, but Joy didn't smile back. "But doesn't there seem to be something performed in that stillness?" she went on, her voice smooth. "I mean, the big hair, the sparkle, the exaggerated femininity. The air in the studio felt instantly cooler. Some people might say it's a little dated, you know." The tension was palpable now. Whoopi looked at her sidelong. One of the other co-hosts shifted in her seat. Papers rustled. But Dolly didn't flinch. No tightness in her shoulders. No hint of defense in her face. No sign that she was anything but poised and calm. She tilted her head, meeting the accusation with an unfazed serenity. "Well, Joy," Dolly said, her voice gentle, "I don't think femininity is something to be ashamed of. It's just a way of being powerful." Joy's lips pursed together. "Well, sure," she retorted. "But doesn't it seem a bit much for young girls out there to watch and think that success means you have to look a certain way? That your voice won't be taken seriously unless you sparkle from head to toe?" The words hung in the air, sharp, but cloaked. And at that very moment, everything could have imploded. Dolly rested her fingertips against one another on the table, her manicured nails tapping once against the glass. No urgency, no protest, just a silent beat of time. And the question in the air was no longer subtle. How long can poise defend itself before it decides to walk away? "I think young women are smart enough to decide for themselves," Dolly said, her voice soft yet firm. "And I trust them more than I trust labels." A ripple of applause moved through the audience, soft at first, then growing. But Joy leaned back, crossing her arms, unmoved. "I'm just saying," she added, her tone sharpening slightly. "You've built a brand. And sometimes brands can distract from substance." And there it was. Not in the words themselves, but in the intention behind them. That was the moment Dolly understood. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't a conversation. This was something quieter, something more deliberate. A slow chipping away. For the first time, Dolly looked directly at Joy. Not with irritation, not with anger, with clarity. "Well," she said softly, "I reckon substance speaks for itself." Her tone remained kind, controlled, but something had shifted. Subtle, yet unmistakable. Joy noticed. A faint smile crossed her face, as if she'd finally found the reaction she was looking for. "Of course," Joy replied. "I just think it's worth examining." Dolly gave a small nod. "Then examine away," she said. "I've lived my life in the open." This time the audience applauded louder, more firmly, as if choosing a side without saying it out loud. Joy didn't join them. Instead, she adjusted her mug, eyes locked on Dolly, already lining up her next move. And Dolly, still poised, still smiling, had no way of knowing this was only the beginning. So what happens when the conversation refuses to return to safe ground? The show attempted to move forward as if nothing had happened. Somewhere off camera, a producer's silent cue seemed to nudge things back on track. One of the co-hosts quickly pivoted. "Let's talk about your imagination library," she said, smiling with genuine admiration. "Over 100 million books. That's not just charity, that's history." The shift was immediate. Dolly's expression softened, her eyes warming in a way that felt deeply personal. This wasn't about fame. This was about purpose. "Well, honey," she said gently, "books saved me long before fame ever did. A child with a book is a child with a door." The audience responded instantly, applause filling the room, a few people even rising briefly before settling back into their seats. Whoopi nodded, clearly pleased. "That's what we love about you. You've always been about lifting people up." But not everyone shared that sentiment. Joy's mouth twitched just slightly. The kind of reaction you might miss if you weren't looking for it. The kind that suggests disagreement. Dolly either didn't notice or chose not to. And for a fleeting moment, everything felt normal again. The candles flickered. The cameras glided smoothly between faces. The mugs sat perfectly aligned on the glass table, like props in a well-rehearsed scene. Controlled, predictable, until a quiet scrape. Joy slid her mug forward. The sound of ceramic against glass was soft, but it cut through the room. "So, Dolly," she began. 2 words, a completely different tone. The co-host beside her blinked, almost as if bracing for impact. Dolly turned, offering the same openness she gave to everyone, strangers, fans, world leaders alike. Her warmth wasn't selective. It was instinct. "Yes, ma'am," she said. Joy smiled, but it wasn't welcoming. It was measuring. "Do you ever worry," she asked, "that your charity work, your goodness, is part of the brand too?" And just like that, the air changed again. Not because it was the hardest question ever asked, rate you, but because it felt like a trap disguised as thoughtfulness. Dolly's smile lingered for a moment longer than necessary. "Joy," she said gently, "I don't do what I do to look good. I do it because I remember what it felt like not to have." Joy nodded as if she'd anticipated that answer. "Sure," she said, "but you can't deny philanthropy can be convenient for celebrities. It creates a kind of shield. So when someone questions the image, people say, 'Oh, but she gives away books.'" A murmur moved through the audience. Subtle, uneasy. People shifted in their seats, as if instinctively wanting to defend Dolly, but unsure how. Dolly's eyes narrowed just slightly, barely noticeable, like a curtain stirred by a passing breeze. "Well," she replied calmly, "if my work helps people, then I don't mind if it helps my image too." A fair answer, a balanced answer, but Joy wasn't finished. She leaned in, sensing the tension, almost energized by it. "Okay," she said, her voice sharpening. "But let's be honest. This whole persona suite, Dolly, kind Dolly, harmless Dolly." A pause. The room held its breath. "It's a performance, isn't it?" And now the question wasn't just hanging in the air. It was pressing down on everyone in the room. Because at that moment, one thing became painfully clear. This wasn't about understanding Dolly Parton. It was about challenging whether she was real at all. Whoopi took a breath, as if poised to interrupt, and stopped. Sometimes, the biggest, baddest thing you can do is let someone tear down their own walls. Dolly didn't even flinch. Instead, she gave Joy a small, knowing nod. The kind of nod you offer up when you've already decided not to make a circus of the thing. "Honey," Dolly said with soft sweetness, "everything we do out in public is a show. Yours included." A few surprised titters bubbled up from the audience. Nowhere near rude, just startled. Because it wasn't an accusation, it was the truth. And it had been delivered so gently, it was nearly impossible to dispute. But Joy had other ideas. "No," Joy countered, her smile gone. "Mine is a conversation. Yours is an act." The energy shifted. "You simper. You bat your eyes. You play the adorable, naive country girl persona," Joy went on. "And somehow, people mistake that for strength. People revere you." Dolly's fingers laced together a bit tighter, her polished nails digging into her own palm. Still calm. Still measured. "Joy," Dolly said, her voice deep and steady. "I've been called far worse than Doll." Joy scoffed. "You're missing the point." "I'm addressing the point," Dolly corrected. "Just maybe not in the way you expected." And that comment, light and innocuous in the way it was delivered, landed like a blow. The co-hosts around the table seemed to be either finding their cue cards fascinating or giving small, uncertain smiles that never quite reached their eyes. But Joy was not dissuaded. She could feel the energy of the room, a palpable thing. She was building to something. "Here is the point," Joy stated, leaning in conspiratorially. "You want to be seen as this symbol of female empowerment. But the reality is that the image you've cultivated has women looking a certain way because they think that's what men wanted women to look like for the past 50 years. It's all about this image of perfection, and that's just not progressive." And there it was. Not observation, condemnation. Dolly slowly blinked. When she spoke again, her tone was still kind, but it lacked its earlier softness. "Joy," she said, "I did not construct myself for the sake of men. I constructed myself in order to navigate this world." The words were simple enough, but they held a gravity that the others hadn't even approached. Joy opened her mouth to continue the argument, but Dolly lifted a finger. Polite, reasonable, definitive. "And before you judge what kind of woman I am," Dolly continued, "you might want to ask yourself a question." Joy's smile froze on her face. "What question?" Dolly offered another smile, a small upward curve of her lips. This time, it wasn't warmth, it was dominance. "When you look at me," she asked, her voice barely a whisper, "are you seeing a woman who freely chose her path, or are you only seeing what you've been conditioned to despise?" The studio fell utterly silent. It wasn't an explosive argument, nothing so cathartic and clean as that. It was quieter, more profound, more unsettling because it didn't shut Joy down. It held up a mirror to her. Joy's mouth opened again, a thin, brittle laugh escaping. "Oh, please," she snapped. "Despise. I just can't watch these older women pretend this little charade is empowerment." A collective intake of breath was audible from the audience. The bright, cheerful holiday set with all its twinkling lights, warm glow, and cheerful sentiment now felt like a stage for something much heavier than they'd anticipated. Dolly's gaze flickered just for a moment towards the camera, then returned to Joy. And for the first time, it was utterly clear. She wasn't trying to win. She was fighting not to lose herself. "Joy," Dolly said, her voice still measured, "I have never asked for your approval of my hair." Joy shrugged, a performative gesture. "Well, it's kind of hard to miss," Dolly nodded. "And I have never asked you to approve of my choices." Joy leaned back, a hint of triumph returning to her features. "Then why are you getting so defensive?" Dolly paused. And the pause went on, long enough for everyone in the room, the studio audience, the co-hosts, Joy, everyone to feel the weight of it. "Because you aren't disagreeing with my choices," Dolly said at last, her voice gaining an edge of steel. "You're mocking them." Joy's face turned a shade of angry red. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Dolly asked quietly. "Or is that just what bullies do when they get called out?" The word bullies echoed through the studio, like distant thunder rolling across the room. Whoopi's eyes widened. One co-host's mouth hung slightly open in surprise. Joy stiffened. "Don't call me a bully," Joy snapped back, her tone turning sharp and shrill. "I'm asking a question." Dolly didn't raise her voice. "That's the difference, Joy," she said evenly. "Questions are for inquiry. Yours are for assault." Joy's smile was completely gone. For a single beat, something flickered behind her eyes. Calculation, a desperate need for a killer soundbite, an eagerness to exploit a weakness. Push harder. Damage control. Go for the money shot. And she went for it. "Well," Joy said, leaning forward again, with a new, more venomous confidence. Let me be blunt. You are not the sweet little thing people believe you are. You are a businesswoman who sold a fantasy. And the fact that you sold it so well, people have stopped questioning who you are, just shows us the power of a manufactured narrative. The air in the studio crackled. The stakes had been raised. And this was no longer about Dolly. It was about what would happen next. The audience, which is usually so fast to react, was totally quiet. It felt like some fundamental line had just been crossed. Dolly didn't move for a second. But then, there was a shift, so small it could almost be missed. Her hands, which had been folded loosely, began to unfold. Her shoulders, which had been slumped just a hair, slowly began to raise and fall again, like someone trying to right themselves or gain a moment's footing without being seen to do so. Her smile slowly dissolved, not into anger, but into a kind of profound restraint. And when she finally spoke, her quiet voice held a power no raised voice ever could. "Honey," she said softly, "you keep acting like you know me." Joy's eyes narrowed slightly. "I know what you show me." Dolly gave a small nod. "And you keep pushing," she went on, her tone even, "like you're just waiting for me to break down, so you could be proven right." Joy scoffed. "That's ridiculous." Dolly leaned forward just an inch or two, not in a threatening way, not with aggression, just enough to eat up a fraction of the space between them. "No, honey," she said quietly. "That's exactly what this is." The room stilled, because in that one moment, an undeniable thing happened. Dolly Parton, queen of sweetness and all things light, had dropped the act we all knew so well. And Joy Behar had realized she might just have pushed the one person in the room who didn't need to shout to take control. Joy opened her mouth to speak, but Dolly spoke first. "One more question like that," she said, still calm but with a steel undertone, "and we're going to have a very different conversation." A line had been drawn. Clear, quiet, unmissable. Joy blinked. For the first time that morning, she didn't have an immediate, sharp reply. But back down, that wasn't Joy's style. Instead, she gave a slow, thin smile. A smile that had more threat than humor to it. "Good," she said, "because I'm not done." And the way she delivered that word sent a ripple through the unspoken corners of the studio. Back behind the cameras, producers were already reaching for their headsets, because everyone suddenly understood this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a collision. And why didn't anyone try to stop it? Why didn't the show cut to commercial, reset the mood, bring back control? Because sometimes when a moment is that intense, no one wants to be the one to break it. The soft glow of holiday candles still flickered merrily behind the desk, strangely calm, almost discordant, with the palpable tension in the air. Joy shifted in her seat, a thrill of anticipation shooting through her. This was her domain conflict masquerading as commentary. Dolly leaned back a bit, her hands folded together loosely once more. But the softness was gone. All that was left was a composed, measured control that had been honed to a razor's edge. Joy cleared her throat. "You know," she began with an air of thoughtful introspection, "people are always just so protective of you, Dolly. I've always been so fascinated by that." A few nervous, scattered giggles came from the audience. "You say one sweet little thing," Joy continued, her eyes sharp, "and everyone just applauds like you've solved the world's problems." Dolly remained unreadable. "I mean," Joy went on, "you talk about kindness and empowerment, But at the end of the day, you've just gone along with it. You've just played the system. You never really challenged anything. A beat. That's not bravery, she said. That's marketing. The word hung in the air, heavy with its implications. Whoopi leaned forward, a concerned frown on her face. Joy? No. Let her answer, Joy cut in swiftly, a slight edge in her voice. I want to know what she thinks. But everyone could feel it. That wasn't about knowing. That was about making her squirm. Dolly took a slow, quiet breath. The kind you take when you're deciding between keeping the peace or just telling the unvarnished truth. I've challenged plenty, she said calmly. Just not in the way you seem to expect. Oh? Joy raised an eyebrow, a challenging glint in her eye. How so? Dolly turned her head, her gaze drifting slightly toward the audience, though not seeking approval, seeking a kind of grounding. I challenged poverty by refusing to stay poor, she stated. I challenged illiteracy by helping put books into the hands of children. I challenged exploitation by taking ownership of my work. A beat, real, measured, undeniable. But Joy just smirked. And you challenge beauty standards, she countered, her smile tight, by exaggerating them. A sharp intake of breath swept through the audience. And this time, Dolly's eyes hardened, just enough for anyone watching to see. Joy, she said, her voice still steady, but with an unmistakable new firmness. You keep mistaking your opinion for authority. And suddenly, the tension that had been building wasn't building anymore. It had arrived. A short laugh escaped Joy, an airy, disdainful sound. And I suppose you aren't responsible at all? Dolly countered levelly, not missing a beat. Joy smirked. This isn't the forum for this. And where is the forum then? Dolly pushed. Behind a desk, safe in your judgment, while you criticize women's lives from a distance. The applause started immediately this time. Strong, confident. The room was no longer hesitant. Joy's smile vanished. You're deflecting, she accused. This entire image of the sweet country girl. It's a manipulator's trick. You use your charm, so people won't look closely at you. Dolly leaned forward just enough for her elbows to graze the table. Let me be perfectly clear, she said, her voice calm. I've never asked anyone not to question me. Folding her arms, Joy pressed harder. Then answer this honestly. If you're so empowered, why do you adhere to a persona created by men? And there it was. Not a new question, but one that carried an unexpected weight. A shift in the atmosphere that seemed to ripple through the studio. Dolly held Joy's gaze, and for a long moment said nothing. The silence stretched until it was almost palpable. Even the crew behind the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Finally, Dolly spoke, her voice quiet but stripped of any warmth. I didn't adhere to anything. I chose, Joy scoffed. You call that a choice? Yes, Dolly said. Because the idea of empowerment doesn't have to look like yours to be valid. Joy shook her head. You're romanticizing conformity. A small, humorless smile played on Dolly's lips. And you're weaponizing contempt? The words landed with a quiet, devastating precision. Joy opened her mouth to retort, but Dolly continued. You know what frustrates me most, Joy? She paused. It's not that you dislike my hair. It's not that you don't respect my work. Joy rolled her eyes, but Dolly soldiered on. It's that you continue to speak as if there is only one way to be a woman, and it is always your way. A collective gasp went through the audience, followed by an explosion of applause. The sound was deafening. A wave of energy that drowned out any protest. Even Whoopi, watching from the side, let out a choked breath. Joy's face contorted with rage. That's absurd! You're projecting! No, Dolly said softly. I'm observing. Joy leaned forward, her voice rising. I am so tired of women like you getting a free pass because you smile and cut checks. You don't get to escape scrutiny just because people like you. Dolly nodded slowly. And you don't get to pass off hostility as scrutiny just because you enjoy tearing others down. Joy's jaw tightened. That's insulting. So is being called a cartoon, Dolly said, her gaze unwavering. So is having my life's work dismissed as a costume. The room crackled with a new, volatile energy. This was no longer a polite television interview. You want honesty? Joy demanded, her voice ringing with emotion. I think your entire image infantilizes women, telling them they have to be cute to get anywhere. I think that's irresponsible. A stunned silence fell. Dolly remained still. Then, with deliberate calm, she adjusted her jacket. You do not get to decide what empowers women, she said, her voice measured. Not you, not me. Nobody. Joy let out a hollow laugh. Spare me the platitudes. This is not a platitude, Dolly said. A beat passing. It is a boundary. Joy blinked, and for the first time, the word seemed to register. For the past 20 minutes, Dolly continued, you've spoken at me, not with me. You've belittled my appearance, questioned my character, and discarded my choices. Joy started to interrupt, but Dolly raised a hand, a simple, unobtrusive gesture that somehow halted her. I stayed because I believed you would eventually ask a question worth answering. The quiet accusation landed like a punch, and Joy's composure finally broke. You're being dramatic, Dolly offered a small nod. That's what people say when they're afraid of being confronted. Suddenly, Joy sprang to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the floor. I am not going to sit here and be accused of bullying. This is my show. Dolly met her gaze, her expression unreadable. That, she said, the words echoing in the sudden stillness, is precisely the problem. Joy froze, her eyes wide with shock. This isn't your show, Dolly continued. It is a platform, and platforms have responsibilities. Joy's voice elevated, her tone now harsher, almost a screech. You don't have a right to lecture me on responsibility. Dolly leaned back, finally exhaling. You're right. I don't. A beat of silence, then Dolly continued, her tone gentle. But I do have the right to decide how I'm spoken to. A tense silence descended upon the room, not due to Dolly's anger, because she wasn't angry. I came on in good faith, she went on, her voice still composed as she stood slowly. I answered your questions. I endured your tone. I even gave you the benefit of the doubt. Dolly reached for her mug, gently picked it up, then set it back down. But I'm not going to stay in a place where respect isn't reciprocal. Joy let out a scoff. So, you're going to walk off now? Dolly met her gaze directly. I haven't decided yet, but you are making the decision for me. Behind the cameras, chaos erupted. Producers flinched, headset mics went quiet, fingers poised to cut, redirect, anything. Joy crossed her arms, her stance defiant. If you walk off, it's on you. Dolly's gaze softened slightly, her eyes now filled with a quiet sorrow. No, honey, it's on you. The audience roared back in, louder than before. Dolly turned slightly towards Whoopi. Thank you for having me, she said, her tone earnest. I'm so sorry it had to end this way. Whoopi nodded, her face etched with a difficult mixture of concern and disappointment. Me too. But Joy wasn't finished. We are not finished, she snapped back. Dolly paused, turned around, locked eyes with Joy once more. "Yes," she said softly. "We are." And for the first time since this started, Joy Behar had nothing to say. The silence did not hold. The air buzzed with anticipation. You could feel the energy building. The only question now was not if, but when. Then Joy snapped again. "You know what? If you don't know how to handle a difficult conversation, you probably shouldn't come on a live show." The words spilled out, defensive and forced. And they didn't have the impact she intended. Dolly stood perfectly still, her posture straight, her expression composed, but no longer forgiving. The audience watched in stunned silence. The holiday lights in the background seemed to dim slightly. "Joy," Dolly said softly, her eyes sweeping across the table one last time. "Difficult conversation isn't the same as disrespectful." Joy rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. You're just mad because someone finally stood up to you." Dolly offered a faint, knowing smile. "No, I'm sad because you confused cruelty with courage." That was it. Joy threw her hands up. "Fine. Walk off and prove my point." Dolly looked around the table, at Whoopi, the other hosts, the audience that had been collectively holding its breath for an eternity. She nodded slowly. "I think I will." A chorus of gasps rippled through the studio. Slowly, deliberately, Dolly reached for her microphone. She unclipped it, placing it gently on the table, not as an act of defiance, but a quiet act of resolution. "I came on to talk about music, books, and hope," she stated, her voice firm. "I did not come on to be spoken down to be mocked, or to be made a spectacle of." Her gaze returned to Joy. "I wish you well," she added, "but I'm not going to be in a place where kindness is mistaken for weakness." Joy's mouth opened. Too late. Dolly turned and walked off set. The studio exploded. The audience rose in unison, applause crashing down, loud, sustained, deafening, not polite, not performative, real. Joy sat stunned. Whoopi cleared her throat. "Well," she said, her voice careful, "we'll be right back." But there was no going back, because with that calm, controlled walk off, no shouting, no name-calling, Dolly Parton had drawn a definitive line, and every single person watching knew who had crossed it. The question we must ask is this: when respect disappears, what do you prioritize? Fighting for your place, or knowing when to leave? Sometimes, the loudest statement is the quietest one. Dolly didn't raise her voice, she didn't trade barbs, she simply refused to participate where respect was absent. If you believe dignity is strength, if you believe kindness is not weakness, and if you feel moments like this should be remembered forever, make sure you like the video, subscribe to Pressure Point, and add your thoughts in the comments. Did Dolly do the right thing by walking off? Or should she have stayed and battled it out?